Good morning. It's Mark Morris with Word of Faith Fellowship, and thank you again for listening to us. We're so glad to be here with you today and share what God has done in our lives here at the Word of Faith Fellowship. And today's an amazing day. I've been thinking about this. This is actually 1 year today that we've been doing this radio program. We started December 15th of last year, and I didn't know that it would be going on this long, but there's just been so much that we have shared and enjoyed sharing with you, and we've had so many people from our church that have wanted to come and share their testimonies and their lives with you. And so all of our radio programs are on our website, and our website is wordoffaithfellowship.org, and you can find the radio program link, and you'll see lots of wonderful testimonies about what Jesus has done in our lives. And we've also spent a lot of time addressing allegations that have been made against our church over the years. And so I think you'll find it helpful to go to our website. Today I have another powerful testimony. It's amazing how many people in our church have been transformed by the power of God, and they have wanted to come on this program and share with you. We've had over 170. I've lost count past that number, and we just keep going. But over 170 people on this program sharing with you what God has done. He has truly changed our lives. And so today I have Katrina with me, and Katrina actually is a paralegal at my law firm. She's we have a fairly large staff at our law firm, and she's one that helps with disability. But she is one whose life has truly been changed. She had a very rough childhood. It's amazing how the devil comes after us when we're children sometimes, and the devil was hard at work in her life to get her going down the wrong path when she was very young. But God came into her life, and so let's hear from Katrina how God has changed her life. Katrina, go ahead.
I just want to say I'm really grateful for this opportunity to be able to share with everybody what God has done in my life. I want to start out, before I tell you a little bit about myself, there's a scripture that I want to read out of the book of Psalm, and it's in Psalm chapter 139, and it really talks about how God had a hold of my life and all of our lives before we were ever born. But in verse 13 it says, "For you did form my inward parts, you did knit me together in my mother's womb. I will confess and praise you, for you are fearful and wonderful, and for the awful wonder of my birth. Wonderful are your works, and that my inner self knows right well." And then it says, "My frame was not hidden from you when I was being formed in secret, and intricately and curiously wrought, as if embroidered with various colors, in the depths of the earth, a region of darkness and mystery." And then it says in verse 16, "Your eyes saw my unformed substance, and in your book," which is God's book, "all the days of my life were written before they ever took shape, when as yet there was none of them." And for a very long time, when I was a little girl, I did not realize that God had all the days of my life written in his book. Right. Honestly, I didn't even know that I had a purpose in this world. When I was born, I was actually born in Wilmington, North Carolina. I grew up with I had my parents, of course, and then I have an older sister. She's 3 years older than me. And for as long as I can remember, most of my growing up younger days, it was a very, very rough time for my sister and I. Prior to us being born, my parents had a lot of problems in their marriage. They actually waited several years before they had children, and there was a lot of strife in our family, a lot of strife. Honestly, that's pretty much what I remember growing up, was just strife and arguing and fighting, and sometimes it got physical. There was not a lot of peace at all. There was not a lot of family time. We just weren't a real close-knit family. Now, in that, my mom, she had been raised in church pretty much off and on her whole life. You know, her grandparents took her to, or her parents rather, took her to church. And my dad, however, was not raised in church, from what I understand. He was, pretty much, I don't think he really ever went to church. But my mom really started having a heart that she wanted her children to have a better way, and so she took us to church, and we went to many different churches. We went to several denominational churches, non-denominational churches growing up, but it was really hard for me because I didn't understand. I understood that, God is love, and there's supposed to be peace and Christians are supposed to live a certain way, but it was not like that in my home. So I really didn't care much for church, as a little girl, because I thought, well, what's the purpose of it? You don't really live how you preach. So when I was 7 or 8, my family moved to an apartment complex in Wilmington. And before that, we had lived in just different, trailers or different things, so I didn't have a lot of people around me. But when we got to this apartment complex, it was a really bad situation for me, really, and my sister. There was a lot of gang activity. There was a lot of drugs. There was a lot of, weapons. There were times that we would go through seasons where there was a lot of break-in and enterings at night in people's homes. So I ended up, because of all the strife and all the turmoil that was in my family, I really did not like to stay at home. So I would go out and meet new people, and I would really essentially stay out on the streets a lot. I stayed away from home as much as possible because I just couldn't handle all that strife and all the fighting and all the arguing all the time. So probably from the ages of 7, well, we'll say 9 to 13 were just the worst time in my life. At that time, my family was going to a church in Wilmington. It was a non-denominational church, and for some reason there was some dissension in the church, and a lot of the members left. So my mom had some friends that were there that were real close to us that tried to kind of take us under their wing and help us a lot. And they started attending a church in Leland, North Carolina, which is just right over the bridge from Wilmington, just like 10 minutes. And this particular church, it was called New Jerusalem Outreach, and it was a non-denominational church, and they believed in prayer and deliverance and God's plan for your life. And it was really the first place that I had been that I saw, well, maybe there are real people that really love Jesus and that people really do live what they preach. Of course, I started there when I was 9, but I was still in this neighborhood, and I was still with all these friends. I had a lot of friends. A lot of my friends were much older than me, which really got me in a lot of trouble. One of my closest friends, at the time we were 11 and 12, and her mom was a partier. She was a drinker, and she would buy us alcohol. She would buy us cigarettes. We could do anything we wanted to at her house, because her thought was, well, this is how I live, so how can I teach my children to be any different? So I stayed at her house a lot. Of course, my parents did not know what I was doing. They really trusted them and had no idea that I was doing the things that I was doing. So my life was just getting worse and worse. There was a lot of rebellion in my heart at that time. I was very rebellious, but it was because of all the hurt and all the torment that I felt at home, all the fear that I felt. I had a lot of fear. Kind of going back about that, when I was much younger, my mom, she was involved in some witchcraft, and my parents watched a lot of like really bad scary movies, horror movies, and there was a lot of violence on the television and blood, and I was just very afraid of everything. I was afraid of the dark. I was afraid of people. I was afraid to be by myself. I just was afraid. So we're going to this church, and somewhere in that time, I don't really remember the actual time, but the pastors of our church in Leland, Buddy and Ma Dawson were their names. They were friends to another pastor of a church in Wilmington that knew Sam and Jane Whaley here at Word of Faith in Spindale. So the pastors and some other ministers in our church actually came here for a seminar. I believe it was probably around like 1989 or 90. I'm not really for sure. But when they came back from that seminar, I remember them coming, and they were so excited about what God had shown them and taught them. And they started teaching us about how to pray and how to cry out to God for God to change our hearts. And this was stuff I'd never heard before. I didn't know that I could cry out and God would really hear me and change me. like I said, I was very tormented. I had a lot of problems. And for the first time, I felt so excited, like maybe I can change, and maybe my life can start, doing better. And there were several times that I actually, received prayer and deliverance, and I was different. I would spend like a whole week praying, asking God to change my heart in an area, or help me to deliver me in the area of fear. And then I would come and I would ask for prayer, and people would pray for me, and I wouldn't have fear. I mean, it was amazing how I started seeing my life change. But then, as I said, I'm still living in this neighborhood. I still have all these friends. I still, there was a lot of peer pressure. I know a lot of people understand about peer pressure when you're a child and you have all that hurt and rejection. You'll do anything to be accepted by people. So things that I never thought that I would do or ever wanted to do, I started doing. I started, the smoking. I started the drinking. I tried drugs. I would party. Like I said, I spent nights out on the street. This whole time, though, I'm starting to learn about God more. And so there was a lot of confusion in my life. And when I was 11 years old, I became friends with a young lady. She actually did not live in my neighborhood. She lived somewhere else in Wilmington. But this young girl had a problem with stealing. And of course, I had never done anything like that. I was afraid. But one day, because of all that peer pressure, we made a plan. It was a Sunday afternoon. We made a plan that we were going to go to the mall and we were going to steal. So we did. We went to the mall in Wilmington, and we actually stole a pretty significant amount of money worth of merchandise from like several stores. We were caught, and when the police called my parents, they came to the mall and picked us up, and they, of course, took me home. And after I got home, I ran away because I knew I had like totally messed up. I didn't know what was going to happen to me. I knew I was in really big trouble. We were gone most of that afternoon. My dad finally found my friend and I, and he actually made me go to church that night. Of course, that was the last place I wanted to be, was church. I was very afraid. I was very upset. I was upset with myself. I didn't know what was going to happen, but he took me to church, and he took me. There was one person in our church. He was actually the associate pastor. His name was Rich Dolan. And he was probably one of the most instrumental people in my life at that time. He was the first real father figure that I had that taught me what love really was. Anytime I was having a hard time, my dad would get on the phone with Rich, and he would come all the way from Leland to Wilmington to our apartment and just sit down and start talking to me and say, "Katrina, what's going on? What can we do? What do we need to do?" He would pray for me. So he was just a really strong instrument and tool in my life that really started, the first person that ever really, started really taking care of me. So after that happened, that would have been in 1991. In July of that year, there was a youth seminar here. And of course, at that point, I had never come here to the church in Spindale. But my sister was going to be coming to that youth seminar, so she talked me into coming. So I came, and from the moment I walked in the doors, I knew that this is where God wanted me to be. And it was so different of anything I had ever felt, ever experienced. Here I am, I'm 11 years old, I'm getting ready to turn 12. I'm waiting to go to court. I don't know what's going to happen to me. I'm a mess. I'm an absolute mess. My life was in shambles. And all I felt was the love of God that week. So when I got back, of course, I had to go to court. And I was, when I went to court, my parents took me, and Rich came with me. And the judge told me that basically what we had done, of course, was very serious, and he really had all right to put us in juvenile detention. I mean, and we could have and should have gone. But God was so merciful to me, because that was not what God had for me. That was not his plan for my life. So I was put on probation for a year. I was on house arrest for 30 days. I wasn't allowed to leave my front door, except he did allow me to go to church, and I had to do some community service. But it really, at that point, of course, I never ever did that again, and I learned my lesson for sure. But and the other thing was I had to go back to every single person that I had stolen from and apologize. And my father made sure that I did that, and that was probably the most humbling of the whole experience. But it taught me a lot. Really, I started really seeking God after that time in my life, because I really wanted to change, and I didn't want to live the way I was living anymore. So time went on. We would come up here for seminars off and on, but of course I was still living in this neighborhood. So eventually, when I turned 14, God made a way for me and my family to be able to get out of Wilmington, and we moved to Leland. And I never turned back. I stopped contacting all my friends. I mean, I had a lot of friends, not because I didn't love them, but it was just they weren't godly friends for me. I stopped listening to the ungodly music that I was listening to. Everything that I had done, all the rebellion just started changing in my life, because all I wanted was to serve Jesus. And I started realizing that I really did have a call of God in my life, and God had a plan for me. So our school, or our church rather, in Leland started a Christian school when I was in 8th grade. So I was able to go through 12th grade there. Before that, I was in a public school, and that was a great blessing, because I was able to be, more guarded and protected, and didn't have to be involved in all that, the worldly things that are out there. And after I graduated from high school, I really was crying out for God's will for my life. And like I said, I would come up here for seminars twice a year, and every time I would come, I wanted to stay. I never wanted to go back home. And I knew that God one day was gonna let me move here. I just didn't know how it was gonna happen. So one of my really good friends in church, her name was Allison, she managed a Subway in Leland, and her father, John, actually lived here and had lived here for a long time. So Allison and I were very close, and we actually were going to go to nursing school together. So she was going to move here, and she told me, she said, will you please move with me, because we have to go to school together, and I don't want to leave without you. So in 2002, Allison and I moved from Leland to Spindale, North Carolina. We lived with her parents. We started going to college, and really my life started really changing. One thing that I want to say, God really started teaching me about forgiveness when I moved here, and how to forgive my parents. I mean, I know my life was not good as a child, but my mom really wanted to do what was best for us. And, at the time, I thought that all of the problems that were in my family were my fault. I didn't realize that it had nothing to do with me or my sister. It was, their problems. But as a child, you think that it's all you. I really, prayed and asked God, because I didn't want to have any kind of unforgiveness or bitterness towards my parents, because, the Bible says that if you don't forgive, God won't forgive you. And I didn't want that, because I knew if God didn't forgive me, then I wouldn't go to heaven. So all those things started changing. I was able to forgive my dad, and of course my mom, lives here with us now also, and has lived here for the last probably 10 years, and we have a very good relationship. My sister and I have a good relationship. My sister's not in the church, but she and I are very close. I wanted to talk a little bit too quickly about my dad, because he was, he had a lot of problems, like I talked about earlier. But during the time where we started learning about prayer and deliverance at our church before I moved here, he really started giving his heart to Jesus, and he started getting prayer, and he started to change. And he did that for probably a year. It was the best, really probably the best year of my life as a child, because the strife started getting better. But my dad never would really totally turn his heart to Jesus. So he and my mother ended up getting divorced when I was a little bit, older. They got divorced. He remarried. It was a terrible marriage. And he just went from one thing to another, searching. He could do anything. He was a welder. He was an automotive mechanic. He was a biker. He was a truck driver. I mean, he could fix your house. He could build your house. But he didn't have, there was no purpose for his life, he didn't think, because it's like he was always striving after something and never could attain what he wanted. So after I'd moved here, in 2011, well, it was probably in 2010, he was diagnosed with colon cancer, which he actually didn't tell us. We didn't find this out till after he had died, but in January of 2011, he committed suicide. And that was really hard, especially for my sister, because he lived with her. It was a hard situation for us, but again, I am surrounded by a humongous family of people that took care of me and prayed for me, and honestly, I didn't have any torment about it at all. I mean, God took me through that situation, and it was a miracle, because a lot of people, that's a hard thing to lose a parent, and especially if they take their own life. But God really, before that, I really helped my dad and tried to help him as best as I could, and so I didn't have any regrets. And I knew that I had totally forgiven him, and I loved him regardless of how it was growing up. I loved my dad, and that was one thing that God taught me here, which was priceless. The other thing, like I said, I moved here in 2002. In 2004, I was married to a wonderful husband. His name is Christian. He's actually been on this program a couple times. But God has given us two beautiful children here. They're 11, our daughter's 11, and our son is 8. And the one thing I want to say, and I want to stress, is when I was a little girl, when I would lay in my bed every night and cry myself to sleep, I would always think, one day, God, I don't want my children to ever have to go through what I've gone through. And we have been attacked so much in our church for where we've guarded and protected our children from the things of the world. And a lot of people don't understand. I've heard people say, well, don't you need to let your children learn and experience? Well, no. Everything I learned and experienced as a little girl affected my life in a negative way. My children are very happy. They are so protected from, they don't roam the streets at night at 3 o'clock in the morning. They don't have weapons that they sneak to school. They don't smoke. I mean, they don't even know what that is. I mean, they are so protected. They have peace. They have friends that love them. There's no peer pressure. They're not pressured to do things that are wrong. All of their friends in their school and all their friends in their church, they love each other. They play together. They ride their bikes. We do family things together. And this is stuff that I didn't have growing up. Our family time at night was sitting in front of a television, and you weren't allowed to talk unless it was a commercial. There was no family time. But my husband and I, we spend time with our children. We love them. We interact together, and they're just children. They're happy, peaceful, blessed, non-abused children. So, God really, He has done so much for me since I've been here. All the things that are said about our church and about our pastors and about, it's total opposite. I grew up in a very tumultuous life, and it is so not like that here. We are peaceful, we are happy, we love each other, we are friends. I just can't stress enough how much God has done in my life, and I don't have any of that torment that I had as a little girl. I don't have now, and that has been because of prayer, where God has, I've allowed Jesus to change my heart, where I've cried out to God for Him to help me in these areas. And when I struggle, I go to Jesus, and I know how to cry out to Him and seek Him and seek His will for my life, and let Him speak His word to me to sustain me. every day, I wake up in the morning and I just say, God, what do you want to say to me today? And God will give me a word that'll anchor my heart through the whole day, through any trial or test that we may go through. So I know that, I'm so grateful to be in this church. I'm so grateful for the pastors, Sam and Jane. They are like family to me. Yeah. They've been family to my family. They are loving, they are caring, they are compassionate, they understand, they understand what you're going through. You can talk to them. It's like something that I would have loved to have had growing up. I wished I had been born in this church like my children are. So, it's really been a blessing, and I'm so grateful for what God's done in my life here.
And thank you so much. It's amazing to hear how God's hand was on your life. And as you were sharing, I was thinking about you as a child, and you started off with Psalms 139, how God has all of our days planned out, and how when you were little, you didn't know that there was a plan for your life. You didn't know there was a purpose for your life. And here you are, going to other friends' house to get away from the strife, and then you're out drinking, smoking, 9 years old, 10 years old. You're out in the streets at 3 in the morning in Wilmington, and all because you didn't know that there was a plan that God had for your life. And I think about that because it's so important for us to impart this to our children. And I know that's something that's preached in our church, and even the Christian school that we have, is that God has a plan for every single person. And so it's so important. And you were saying how your children now know that, and they see that God has a plan for them. They see that God has all of their days numbered. He has a wonderful life for them. And what a wonderful testimony that God redeemed your life and He restored your life, and now you have this family, this perfect family that God wants. I know your children, they're so happy. They're always full of life, and but that's what God does, is He restores us and He teaches us His way. But it is so important that we teach our children that God has a wonderful plan and a purpose for their life. And the purpose is to serve Him. And when they serve Him, they are going to be so happy. And just how you described your family, just you have family time together. Everybody's happy. You enjoy being together. You enjoy going to church. You enjoy serving God. You enjoy everything that God has for you and your family. And that's the life that God has for us. And the devil has the counterfeit. He wants us to go down his path of destruction. But you found God's path of happiness. So what a great testimony. And we thank you again for listening. This is Word of Faith Fellowship sharing with you what God has done in our lives. And it's so good to know that we have a Savior that can redeem us from every single situation that we've been in. And so we hope that you will continue listening. We have this program Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, 8:30 to 9. And thank you again for listening to us.